Hello, everyone, and thank you so much to those joining us here in Glasgow and those joining us digitally. My name is Alex Otibanjo, and I work at One Young World. It is my pleasure to introduce this next session called Cross-Border Conservation, an orbital perspective from NASA astronaut Ron Garan. The session will start with a presentation from Ron, followed by a discussion with Marinel Ubaldo. On the slide behind me, you should see a Slido link where you're free to ask any questions you may have during this session. Oh, perfect timing. Without further ado, I am delighted to welcome Ron to the stage. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. So I want everyone to imagine that they're on board the International Space Station. And if we could call up the... Thank you. And you're looking through the Earth-facing windowed cupola on the bottom of the ISS. And as you're floating there weightlessly and watching the Earth roll by you silently and slowly, you look out onto the horizon and you see thunderstorms casting long shadows across the horizon. And as we approach one of our 16 daily orbital sunsets and you approach that line below you that separates day from night, you watch as the clouds turn to pink and to red and to gray and finally black. And as we cross into the nighttime shadow of the Earth, you gasp as all the lights of the cities and towns, all the evidence of human activity, all of a sudden come to life. You see the paparazzi-like flashes of lightning storms. You experience dancing curtains of auroras that seem so close, it's as if you could reach out and touch them. I think seeing the planet from that vantage point, you would be amazed at the incredible thinness of our planet's atmosphere. And I think you would be struck by the sobering realization that that paper-thin layer is keeping every living thing on our planet alive. But I also think you'd be struck by the sobering contradiction between the beauty of our planet on one hand and the unfortunate realities of life on our planet. And I believe that in spite of that fragility, in spite of all that, that you would also be filled with hope seeing the planet from that vantage point. Seeing the unlimited potential of what we can accomplish when we work together, as evidenced by the International Space Station itself, would extend your optimism. And I believe that your definition of the word home would rapidly expand to encompass the planet in its entirety. And I think for the first time you might fully understand what it means to be part of one human family. Now, you don't have to go to space to realize any of this, but I think traveling to space started me on a journey towards a deeper understanding of the beauty of our interdependent fabric of life. I think separation from the natural world enabled me to become a detached witness to its splendor and its unity. And so now I want you to imagine that a planet-destroying asteroid is heading towards Earth. And this asteroid is so big that if it were to hit the Earth, it would wipe out every living thing on the planet. Now, if we knew about this soon enough, we wouldn't have to send Bruce Willis and a team of hero astronauts to blow it to smithereens. We could send a small spacecraft and with the force equivalent to the weight of a feather, give that asteroid just a slight nudge. And that nudge, over the course of its travel to Earth, could result in thousands of miles of mist distance, saving every living thing on the planet. Now, in looking at the planet-destroying asteroid that's heading towards us, known as global warming, there may have been a time when we could have nudged the trajectory of that disaster. Unfortunately, we let that opportunity slip through our fingers. Now, we need to take drastic actions. We need to take them now. And the nudges that we're making are not effective. Now we need to make a massive course correction. But in order to make this course correction effectively, we need to accurately assess the problem. We need to realize that global warming is just the tip of our rapidly melting iceberg. That below the waterline are the societal structures that ensure that anything we do to mitigate or reverse global warming is not going to be effective. Societal structures that plunder our true treasure, that is our thriving biosphere. And they plunder it to maximize something that has no intrinsic value, digital numbers in a bank account. And these same societal structures apply no intrinsic value to nature or even to humans. These societal structures objectify the natural world into an external environment that we just happen to be in. Societal structures that treat everything, including the very life support systems of our planet, as the wholly owned subsidiary of the global economy. Societal systems that do everything in their power to suppress the truth that we are one. That is, every living thing on the planet and the planet itself. Societal systems that permit wealthy individuals and corporations to buy power to maintain the status quo. Societal structures that allow wealthy individuals and corporations to live a lifestyle that raises the temperature of our planet while using their wealth to protect themselves from the disastrous effects of their actions, leaving the poor primarily to deal with the catastrophes that global warming will bring. Societal structures that mask the true underlying root cause problem beneath the waterline. And the problem is that we don't see ourselves as planetary. So what do I mean when I say planetary, and why planetary, not global? Well, we don't live on a globe. Global is our financial networks, our computer networks. It's abstract lines covering a sphere. When I looked out the window of the International Space Station, I saw an iridescent biosphere teeming with life. I didn't see the economy. The economy is a subset of society, which in turn is a subset of the environment, of our biosphere. That means that our global economy is the wholly owned subsidiary of the biosphere, not the other way around. But since our political, our business, our cultural systems put the complete focus on growing the economy at all costs, and since our cultural systems treat everything, including the very life support systems of our planet, as the wholly owned subsidiary of the global economy, it's obvious from the vantage point of space that we're living a lie. We need to move from thinking economy, society, planet to planet, society, economy. Our economy is dependent on our society, and our society is dependent and embedded in our environment, in our biosphere. Now, we need to restructure and reprioritize these systems not out of any ideology or eco-philosophy, but rather because this is the reality of the world that we live in. So I want you to imagine that in the year 2021, we finally figured out a way to come together. And nations and corporations and grassroots efforts came together and enacted a major course correction to the trajectory of our society. And we entered into a new human epoch. A new epoch where businesses are created and exist first and foremost to serve the needs of civilization. A new epoch where businesses are not seen as discrete entities operating in a solely self-serving vacuum, but as interdependent nodes in a fabric of prosperity where everyone has the ability to live a good life in harmony with our biosphere and each other. In this new epoch, business leaders, political leaders take a long-term view of investment and of progress. So how do we get to this new epoch? Well, we need a new map. This is the first thing, so that we can navigate there. This is the image that our civilization is currently based on. It's a two-dimensional landscape of nation-states fighting and competing over resources and ideology. It's also not only where nations compete, but NGOs, special interest groups, political parties, and this is the real world. This image is known as Earthrise. It was photographed over 50 years ago by the crew of Apollo 8. And this image proclaims the fact that we are one people traveling on one planet towards one shared future, for better or for worse. From this vantage point, you can't see nation states. all you can see is the fragile oasis that is our home planet Earth. So let's look back again at this two-dimensional image. This is the guidepost of the old human epoch. What we need to understand is that we created this, but we didn't create it based on the reality of our world. Now, this image may have been appropriate. It may have been appropriate back before we realized how interdependent we all are. It may have been appropriate before we realized that humans could destroy the very life support systems of our planet. And it may have been appropriate when nation states could operate in relative isolation. This is no longer the appropriate guidepost for our actions. This is the appropriate guidepost for our actions. This is reality. But the way that we're currently making our political and business decisions is based on the two-dimensional map. In order for humanity to progress and prosper, we must deal with the very real problems and challenges facing us in the context of the real world. We need to embrace the image of Earthrise and design and build a future that is based on these principles and enter into a new human epoch. One of the foundational pieces of the construction of our future is business enterprise. Business decisions that we're making right now have the incredible power to either destroy our world by clinging to the two-dimensional mindset of the old human epoch, a mindset that is obsessed with conquest and competition and growth and profit maximization at all costs, or business and enterprise can save our world by embracing the image of Earthrise and helping to usher in a new epoch based on three key tenets: interdependence, long-term thinking, and profound collaboration, all wrapped in the blanket of empathy and compassion. We cannot continue as a species with a two-dimensional map as our model. The principles of Earthrise will lead to a positive restorative future, a future where a stabilized human population can live within our planet's limits in peace and in harmony, a future that we would all want to be a part of. So how do we get there? Our planetary civilization right now has been given the opportunity to ascend to incomprehensible heights, both figuratively and literally. In order to get to this visionary future, humanity needs to metaphorically launch into orbit. So I want everyone to imagine that there is a giant rocket on the launch pad. On top of this rocket sits an unconscious superorganism that represents all life on Earth. Now, this superorganism not only represents everything that currently lives, but everything that will ever live. And as the rocket's first stage fires, tremendous brute force lifts it from the launch pad and starts an acceleration upward. Eons of competition and conquest push it further. Dynasties and dictatorships align and organize human effort on a massive scale. In response, tremendous suffering is expelled from the nozzle's exhaust. Greed and conflict serve as catalysts, sparking tremendous technological acceleration. The First World War produces radios and airplanes. The Second World War produces nuclear power. The space race and the Cold War produced satellite communications, personal computers, and solar power. Blind independence and unconstrained growth consume enormous amounts of natural fuel as the rocket approaches staging. The noise is deafening, the vibration is violent and unpredictable. As it continues its climb, the rocket approaches the inflection point between the first and the second stages. As the first stage of the rocket burns out, the lone passenger, the superorganism representing all living things, awakens and is faced with a choice: jettison the weight of the first stage and fire the second engine, or hold on to the first stage and fall back to Earth in a fiery crash. But the superorganism, having just awakened, is confused. It knows that the first stage brought it to this point and is reluctant to jettison it. It does not yet realize that it can't make it to orbit carrying the extra weight of the first stage. But even now, a spark of awareness arises within it. Just as the rocket is about to start tumbling back towards the Earth, the superorganism realizes the futility of hanging on to the first stage and finally lets go. Instantly, the second stage engine fires, and the rocket is exponentially thrusted upward and onward, leaving the noise and the vibration behind. But the awakening superorganism realizes that nobody is steering the ship. Quickly, it establishes the processes to steer the rocket on its ascent. The superorganism bases its decisions on the most accurate data possible, enabling the most accurate predictions of its effect on the trajectory of the rocket. The decisions it makes are in the context of the entire superbody, considering the big picture implications and not just in reaction to its loudest parts. The superorganism determines the impact of a decision beyond the immediate area of concern and determines if harm would be caused elsewhere. Decisions cease to be driven solely by party lines or other parochial or tribal factors. The greater good becomes the driving force of a decision, not party or national loyalty. Those motivations were jettisoned by the superorganism after they realized that it was misguided and fundamentally destructive in the long run. All actions taken consider the long-term, multi-generational effects on all. When considering a course of action, the resultant trajectory is projected out to the decision maker's great-grandchildren. Only those actions that lead to a positive and restorative world for our great-grandchildren are taken. No longer do we sacrifice our progeny for our own present short-term benefit. During this second stage acceleration, course corrections are made with open and transparent inputs and courses of action. All proposed solutions permit everyone to see how the sausage is being made and can survive having a spotlight put on them. No longer do decisions require secrecy to be successful. As the rocket continues its acceleration to orbit, a planetary consciousness arises within the superorganism. This consciousness can be thought of as an embedded system. At the core is social consciousness, where we truly understand the meaning of one human family, where the false notion of separation is finally overturned, and we embrace the basic fact of the interrelated structure of all reality. Encompassing this social consciousness, like the rocket fairing cocooning our spacecraft, is the awareness of an interdependent place within the Earth's biosphere. Together, these two nested systems are the emerging planetary consciousness. With all of this in place, the superorganism can now steer the rocket to orbit. And what is orbit? Orbit is where we no longer need our engines. It's where we have accelerated to the speed where with no additional effort, we can remain at our present altitude. Or, if we so choose, we can continue our ascension further out into the universe. Orbit is where we enter into abundance. It is the long-awaited post-scarcity existence where goods can be produced in great abundance with minimal to no human labor required. Our metaphorical orbit is a place where everyone has what they need, and it's where everyone can choose for themselves how they will contribute to society. Imagine what the world could look like in the next 50 years if the superorganism that represents all life on Earth, which has as its brain the embedded superorganism known as humanity, were awakened and jettisoned all those things that are no longer needed. What would happen if our true starting condition was realized and we were able to make a course correction to steer our trajectory towards an unlimited future? Now, we are at that inflection point right now. We have got to jettison the weight of what no longer serves us and steer ourselves towards this unlimited future. Now, I started off this conversation by immersing us all in the awe and wonder of life in space. And I did that so that we could build our discussion on the foundation of awe and wonder. There are two primary drivers of action. There's awe and wonder on one hand, and there's fear on the other. But only awe and wonder motivates long-term action. Only awe and wonder inspires cooperation and rational thought and self-sacrifice for our higher good. We are not going to be able to rebuild our world by declaring war on global warming. War is fear-based, which means it's divisive, it's self-limiting, and it's counterproductive. Declaring war on something almost never works and usually leads to making the problems worse or creating new problems. Rebuilding our world for the better won't come from prescriptive policy or legislation alone. And it won't be found in the latest exponential technology designed to bend our planet's biosphere to our will. In the planetary civilization of the future, of what we need to build, the dismantling of the societal structures that are holding us back and rebuilding the world will usher in as a quiet whisper. Although massive systemic change is going to be required, no systemic change will occur until a critical number of people identify and challenge their own actions, their commitments, and their identities. No real change will be possible until we finally embrace the fact, the truth, that there is no them, there's only us. No change will be possible until we realize that we're not from Earth, we're of Earth. Only then will real change be possible. We can do this with a nudge of a billion feathers. And the first thing we need to realize is that underneath the surface level imperfections, you and every person you meet is a perfect miracle. And as a perfect miracle, every person, regardless of their profession, their political identity, or any other perceived difference, deserves our respect, our compassion, our empathy, and our care, even if those things are not reciprocated. We have got to find the common ground. We have got to find those things that we agree upon and use them as a jump-off point to address the things that we don't agree on. In any prescriptive policy or solution, we need to make sure that that is restorative to our biosphere, that it lifts up those that are fighting for survival, and that it endows future generations. It also needs to work on both a local scale and a planetary scale. We need to bring together existing grassroots movements that are trying to steer us towards a positive and restorative future. And we need to build grassroots efforts that making doing the right thing for our biosphere very, very profitable, and making harming our biosphere very unprofitable. And we do that with the nudge of a feather. We do that with the personal decisions that we make. And our nudge of a feather translates to a nudge of a billion feathers and takes off exponentially and becomes that course correction, that massive course correction that we need to make. We need to understand that each of us is more powerful than we can imagine. And together, we are unstoppable. And above all else, we need to make sure that we do everything in the spirit of awe and wonder. And so in the spirit of awe and wonder, I want to share with you my return to Earth when my last 6-month mission was complete. When the mission was complete, my 2 Russian crewmates and I got into our spacesuits, we got into our Soyuz spacecraft, and we undocked from the space station and did a couple of laps around the planet. And as we crossed the south tip of South America, we fired our engines to enter into the upper atmosphere. We had this fiery, violent ride through the atmosphere at 5 miles a second. The parachutes opened, they threw us all over the place. Eventually, we smashed into the ground, and we hit so hard that we bounced, we rolled, we flipped over. And now my window was pointed down at the ground. And out of my window, I saw a rock, a flower, and a blade of grass. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm home. And what was really interesting about that thought is I was home, but I was in Kazakhstan. And so to me at that moment, my home wasn't just Houston, Texas, where at the time I lived with my family. Home was Earth. And what I discovered was broadening our definition of the word home to encompass the entire planet did not come with a requirement to forget where I came from, my national, my cultural, my religious affiliations. It simply means seeing those things in the context of the bigger picture. And in the context of the bigger picture, I want us all to know that we can continue this conversation. So we've established this forum. If we want to talk about possible solutions, if we want to dive deeper into the root cause of the problems that we face, please go to rongaran.com/COP26. I also have some videos that I'll send you that dive deeper into the problem. And so I want to thank you all. I want to thank you all for what you're doing and what you will do to help make life on our planet as beautiful as it looks from space. You don't have to be in orbit to have an orbital perspective, and by working together, we don't have to accept the status quo on our planet. So thank you for the time. I appreciate it.
So much, Ron, for that really insightful presentation. It was visually beautiful and really, really insightful. I would now love to welcome Marina Ubaldo to the stage for the second part of the session. Please, everyone, welcome her.
Hello, Ron.
Hi, Miranda.
Thank you so much for your presentation. It was really enlightening. Okay, so I will be asking you some questions, and afterwards, maybe our audience have a questions too that they could ask to you. So first question: how has viewing our planet from space changed your perspective on humanity?
Well, as I explained, it broadened my definition of the word home, seeing the planet from that vantage point. But I think being detached from the Earth made me feel deeply, deeply interconnected and interdependent with everyone and everything on it. So it was really a very visceral thing where, and I kind of equate it to, when you're looking at a beautiful scene, you're sitting on the beach at sunset, you're at the rim of the Grand Canyon, gravity pushes you down into the scene. You're inside the frame of the masterpiece. But being physically detached from the Earth, being in space, I was outside of the masterpiece. I was outside of it looking in. And in some way that I can't really explain, the fact that I was outside of it made me deeply, deeply appreciate the interconnectedness. I mean, I felt like I was looking at a living, breathing organism. And I just had this incredible, wave of gratitude wash over me. Gratitude for the opportunity to see the planet from that vantage point, and gratitude for the planet that we've been given. And pictures just don't do it justice. We live in an indescribable, just absolutely beautiful place. We live in paradise. We're already in heaven. We just don't realize it. It is absolutely gorgeous. But the flip side of that is, I know intellectually, as I'm looking at this, when you zoom into the microscopic details of that beautiful picture, is that life is not always that great. It's not as beautiful as it looks, and you just get filled with this sense of injustice that it doesn't have to be this way. That we can turn it around. We can make life on our planet as beautiful as it looks from space. It's within our power to do it, and for whatever reasons we haven't done it yet.
Yeah, because it's always, from the global north, it's always our debate that we are all connected in so many ways. We're so connected, even if you're in the other side of the world, or even if you're from the Philippines, and even outside the earth, we're all connected, and we have to deeply care for each other and for the living beings here on earth. My second question to you is, the Mana Energy Foundation is a profit environmental organization you helped found. Why did you start this nonprofit, and what project has it initiated?
Well, that project was born out of a desire to help promote renewable energy, but it evolved to become a social enterprise incubator. The first organization that was incubated was Man Energy Limited, which is a social enterprise designed to bring clean water to the world. And the innovation there was to use carbon credits to fund water projects. And that project was very successful, and there's a lot of people in the world right now that are drinking clean water because of it, and so that was really good. But again, what I learned from that experience is how you can't just treat a problem like providing clean water without it affecting everything else. And so everything is just so incredibly interdependent. That's why we need to work together collaboratively to solve all these problems, because they're all linked together. And if we focus overly on one thing at the expense of everything else, then it's going to be counterproductive in the long run.
Yeah, I like that very much, because even now with COVID pandemic, right, everything is just interconnected. And I like how we are highlighting how interconnected we are. And I like highlighting that if one part of the ecosystem is being affected, everything will fall apart. And my next question for you is, how can we encourage cross-border initiatives to tackle the climate crisis?
Well, the first thing we need to realize is that greenhouse gases don't need passports, right? I mean, what happens on one side of the world environmentally affects everywhere else. And so any viable solution has to be a viable solution from the world, right? So we don't have a choice but to cooperate and collaborate across borders, because the problem is across borders. And so, venues like COP, especially COP26, are really important forums to be able to do that type of collaboration. In order for us to be effective and successful during these forums, though, we have to start to overturn some of these structural systems that are holding us back, these structural systems that are trying to maintain the status quo at all costs. They're almost like an immune response to the planet trying to heal itself. It's like the opposite of an immune response. It's a cancer that's fighting back against our efforts to heal the planet or to help the planet heal.
Yeah, because to solve this climate crisis, we have to do it all collectively, right? What do you think about, because there is always the thing with global North helping the global South, instead of making it like a partnership, it is always like the global North is helping the global South. How can we advance more partnership side of our initiatives than being one the beneficiary and one helping?
Yeah, there's two aspects of that come to mind. One is that the only solutions that are going to be successful are truly collaborative solutions, that where it's not one part of the world trying to save the other part of the world. It's the world coming together to try and mitigate and reverse the effects of global warming, for instance. But the other side of the coin is a lot of the problems that we're faced right now were caused by the global North, and specifically were caused by the structures that were put in place that were put in place to keep the status quo intact, right, and to keep the global North wealthy and in a lot of cases at the expense of the rest of the world. And I think that the global North bears a larger responsibility to help mitigate those problems and to start making bigger sacrifices to mitigate things like global warming because of the percentage percentage of responsibility that is owed there.
So collaboration is built and sustains arguably the most complicated structure ever built. The International Space Station. What makes for effective collaboration?
Yeah, that's a really good example. The International Space Station is just a tremendous example of cooperation and collaboration. And specifically, when we're on board the International Space Station, we have one single international unified crew working together to maintain and protect the life support systems of the space station. And it's not just the 6 or 7 people that are on orbit, it's thousands of people in mission control rooms all around the world, all working together to maintain and protect the life support systems of the space station. We need to have that same mindset and bring it down to the ground and create a seamless, international, unified crew that works together to support and maintain and protect the life support systems of our planet. And when we're in space, there's not the Russian crew and the Japanese crew and the American crew and the Canadian crew. It's just the crew. Yeah. The crew, and our primary objective is the survival of the crew, and we need to work to do that. And 15 nations built the International Space Station. Many of these nations weren't always the best of friends. They were on opposite sides of the Cold War, opposite sides of the space race. But what they did is they decided to set aside fear and embrace awe and wonder and do this incredible thing in space, build the most complicated, complex structure ever built and build it in space. And I think the reason why we were able to do that and the reason why we were successful is we found the common ground. We found something that we agreed upon, even though we had lots of things that we disagree on. We found something that we agreed upon, which is space exploration. We decided to work together on that. Because we did that, personal relationships developed, a certain level and platform of trust started to develop. And now we have this thing where it's a platform that we can, if we choose, jump off from and start to address the things that we don't agree on. And so what we tend to do is the exact opposite. We tend to use the things we agree on to force the things that we don't agree on, and that just never works. And so I really do think the International Space Station is a great example for the rest of the world to follow.
That's really amazing. I like everything that you have said. And even with the climate crisis, if we will just find it in our hearts, our common ground, actually we all have our common vision, which is to save our planet Earth, which is to save lives, not just in the Philippines, in other parts of the world, but everywhere in the world. What do young people, young leaders, and older generations, especially those in power, stand to gain from intergenerational dialogue?
So I don't even understand the term intergenerational dialogue. We're humans, and it doesn't matter what nation you're from, it doesn't matter what religion you are, it doesn't matter what ethnicity is. what age you are, what decade you were born in. We just need to work together as one single unified crew. And it's not that we ignore those differences, but those differences provide diversity of perspective, right? And when we see something from two different perspectives, we see it in stereoscopic vision. We start to see the depth of a situation. So the more perspectives we can apply to a problem, to a situation, the deeper our understanding of that problem is going to be, and the more effective those solutions are going to be. So we always hear that diversity is strength, right? Diversity is strength primarily because diversity gives us diversity of perspective. And what we tend to do right now in our very divisive and polarized world is if somebody has a different perspective, then they have a different opinion, and that means that I can't acknowledge any merit whatsoever in their perspective or their opinion, because if I do, then I'm going to lose and they're going to gain, right? And so what we do is we separate ourselves from the very people who have the pieces of the puzzle for our shared problems, for the solutions to our shared problems. And so one of the things we need to do is overcome our divisiveness, overcome our polarization, and to realize that the difference of opinion is the very strength that we bring to a situation, and we need to really embrace that.
Thank you so much. This is really a powerful answer. I always, as a climate activist, I always being asked about those questions and how we could always have a dialogue with the elders, as we call it. But I think we should, in the fight for climate justice, we should not pinpoint who are the most responsible, because it's always like the elders did the crisis, or the reason of the crisis. I think that is divisible. I think we always have to put it together collectively in order to solve the climate crisis. We have to be here collectively and not to make it like a division of generation. And my next question is, space-based technologies have led to numerous interventions that benefit the environment. What latest space technology is being leveraged to accelerate climate action?
Wow, there's a lot. I'll just talk about the International Space Station. I mean, there's lots of science that goes on outside the space station, but the space station itself, there's the European laboratory on the space station, the Japanese laboratory, the US laboratory, the Russians have a lot of laboratory facilities there, and 99.99% of all the research that's conducted there, which is conducted 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, is to improve life on Earth. There is a considerable amount of Earth observation, of atmospheric studies, ways to grow better crops that have less of an impact on the Earth, looking at climate change and global warming and seeing those effects from that. So it gives us a tremendous observation point. It gives us another perspective for the problem-solving process. And the environment of the International Space Station, the research that's being conducted there and the results can't be duplicated anywhere on Earth. It's a very, very unique research environment because of the microgravity and because of its location. And so there's a great deal of research that's going on to not only understand more about what's happening on our planet, but how do we mitigate the negative effects of our human impact to the environment.
Are there any initiatives for that technology to be accessible by the public in the ground, to the grassroots?
I mean, can the public participate in the actual experiments? There is channels to do that, and specifically, there's a lot that has to do with education. So there's a lot of schools and universities that get involved in research. There's a lot of schools and universities that are flying research on board the International Space Station. So yeah, there is a lot of ways to get involved.
Wow, thank you so much. That's all questions that I have. If you guys have questions, yes, please.
I've loved everything that you've said. Oh, sorry. And it's just fantastic. I'd like to try a little experiment. You talk about the deepening of understanding by bringing different perspectives together. Is it possible to try that just now by bringing together the perspective that you have just now and the perspective you had before you ever were an astronaut? and not with the you of now telling the older one what you've learned, but the original one whose views were not formed by being in space. Like what difficulties would the younger you have in understanding the you of now? Does that make any sense?
I think so. If you didn't hear the question, I guess if I understood the question correctly, it's, you know, maybe I'll rephrase it a little bit. What would I say to my younger self before?
No, it's the exact opposite.
What would my younger self say
What
to
would
me?
your younger self, who doesn't yet have that
Yeah.
perspective, say to you?
Yeah.
So we can see it in a different way.
Yeah. So when I was younger, I had concerns about the environment. It's not like I went to space and instantly became an environmentalist. However, I had no clue the extent of the damage that we were doing to the planet. I had no, you know, I was selected as an astronaut in the year 2000, and I flew my first mission in 2008. So I was there for 8 years of crews coming back saying, you are not going to believe how thin the atmosphere is. And so I had a pretty, you know, high expectation for how thin the atmosphere was going to be. But it blew me away. When I saw that for the first time, I remember like being viscerally frightened by it, because it looked like just a little gust of wind would blow the entire atmosphere away. There's absolutely, positively no doubt in my mind that humans can put enough crap up into the atmosphere to create a difference. And so I think I would tell my younger self that, hey, this is really serious stuff, that we really need to nip this in the bud, and the time is running out. We got to act now. The other part of it is I spent the first 15 years of my adult life training to fight the Russians. I was a Cold War fighter pilot. I was stationed on the tip of the sword in former West Germany. Before the fall of the Berlin Wall, I fought in combat in another part of the world. And so I really saw firsthand the divisiveness that can come, the horrors of war. And you know, if you fast forward, 15 years or whatever it was, I find myself at the base of a rocket that's going to take me to space with 2 Russian military officers on a cold April evening from a previous top secret Soviet military installation. And I look at the rocket and I see an American flag and a Russian flag side by side. And so when all of my training in Russia, the novelty never wore off of that. And every stereotype that I was conditioned to believe fell away one by one. And when it all comes down to it, people are people. Everybody wants the same thing. Everyone wants health for their family, and I think everybody wants a healthy planet. Just there's a varying degree of how much sacrifice people are willing to make for a healthy planet. There's a difference of opinion on what's more important, long-term or short-term. That's another issue. And so, I think what I had learned from that experience is, one, there is no them. There's only us. That was visceral. That was real. And that we need to really take this seriously. We have a responsibility to care for our planet, and that doesn't mean just not littering, which is basically what I thought that meant when I was younger. It means really taking an active role in maintaining the natural systems of our planet. Thank you for that.
Thank you so much. Anyone? Yes?
Hello. I'd like just to know from your experience, like how we could benefit from the knowledge we collected from space exploration into, benefiting from that into how we could save our planet. Like for example, the waste we're making now, which could take years, thousands of years to, like for nuclear power, for example. So if there's any possibility, like we could use that space exploration experience into tackling the climate issues we're facing now.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we can learn, so basically what can we learn from how we operate the space station and apply it to how we should operate Spaceship Earth. One of the big things on the space station is it's really, really obvious that you're in a closed life support system, that you only have the resources that you brought up with you, and so we recycle all the water, our sweat, our urine is all recycled. We turned yesterday's coffee into today's coffee. And we're really, really conscious about how much material stuff we use and how we discard it and all that, because it's very, very obvious the impacts of that. We seem to forget that on the surface of the planet, but we live on a planet of finite resources, right? It should be obvious that you can't continue to grow and grow and grow. And we have established a global system where the measure of success of a nation, the measure of success of our national leaders is almost completely dependent on growing the economies, right? Which is a ridiculous thing because you live on a planet of finite resources. So it's obvious that you can't do that indefinitely. That's a short-term measure of doing that. So imagine if you're on the International Space Station and you're just trying to use, and what growing your GDP is, growing your economy is encouraging your citizenship to consume more, to buy more, to, and imagine if that was the mindset on the International Space Station. We wouldn't be on the we wouldn't have an International Space Station very long. But we forget that down here on the surface, that we're in the same exact boat, right? And we're coming to terms with that now, unfortunately, the hard way. But I think if I answered your question, I think that's the big takeaway from that, is that we're on a spaceship. The spaceship has finite resources. We have to manage those resources effectively, and we as a species need a better measure of our progress and our success and how big our economy is growing and how fast it's growing, because that is really destructive as a metric, I should say.
Wow, okay. We still have time to talk.
Hi everyone. We've got a few questions coming in digitally that I thought I might pose to you. So first question is from Alex from the United States, who's asked, Ron, what is your view about exploring and extracting natural resources from other planets to save our planet?
That's an interesting question, because I think we should be using the resources that are available in space, but we're not going to be able to do that to save our planet. It's just not going to work. We're not advanced enough in our space exploration capabilities to be able to save that. A companion question that I've heard is, do I think we'll be able to terraform other planets like Mars, right? Why can't we just terraform Mars and we'll just go to Mars, and when this planet goes down the drain, we'll go to Mars. If we can't control our planet by a couple of degrees, what makes us think we can terraform an entire planet from scratch? It's kind of the same, to me, it's kind of the same question, is, if we can't figure out how to use our resources, the resources that are abundant, but they're finite, right? So we have abundant resources on the planet, but they're finite. If we can't figure out how to manage those resources, we're not going to be able to figure out how to manage resources that are available in space. But we should strive towards that. We should be able to use resources that are available throughout the entire solar system and the universe, but we need to do it as ambassadors of a thriving planet, right? If we go to Mars and we colonize Mars, it should be as ambassadors of a thriving planet. It should not be as refugees escaping a sinking ship, because that's what I get from that question is, can we exploit the rest of the solar system so we can continue to exploit here on the Earth and live exactly the way we live here on the Earth, but just make use of these other resources? Our solution to global warming comes from changing ourselves. And if we don't change ourselves, we're not going to change anything. And so we can't continue to live this way just by thinking we'll get more resources from somewhere else.
It's a really beautiful answer. Thank you so much. Yes?
Thank you. Ron, you mentioned in your presentation about stabilized human population. On our spaceship, planet Earth, where do you think that stable level of human population is? Have we possibly exceeded it already, or do you think we can take it up to 10 billion and still, or in fact not still, because we're not doing it at the moment, but do you think we can manage to use our resources in a way which can protect our life support system?
That's a great question. I'll start out by saying I'm not an expert in this field, but what I've heard is that the resources on our planet could probably support a human population of about 10 billion. Plus, I don't know what the plus or minus is there, But I think more important than what the number is how we stabilize the human population. And I think one of the most effective ways to stabilize the human population is to lift the entire population of the planet out of destitute poverty. And one of the most powerful ways is to educate girls. Because there's many countries around the world where young girls are not being educated for various reasons. In some cases, simple things like they have to spend X number of hours a day fetching water. And there's many things that we can do to enable those young girls to be able to be in school as opposed to those type of things. And I think, it's been proven over and over again that as people rise up from poverty, the population slows down in those areas. And I think that should be a major, again, it just shows how interdependent everything is, because that affects global warming as well. And so we have to be able to see things holistically, right? We need to see how all of these different issues affect each other, and to realize that all these different issues are just symptoms. They're symptoms of the underlying root cause problem, which is how we view ourselves and how we view the planet. And we have this false idea of separation, and the planet is something for us to exploit, as opposed to we're from Earth, not of Earth. And I think that's the root cause problem, and that's why I said we're not going to do anything global warming unless we ourselves evolve and become a different species, a species with a greater awareness of our embedded role, our responsibility as stewards of this planet, because we've been entrusted to be the caretakers of all the other species on this planet, and we're not doing a very good job.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that you say that we have to educate girls, because in my country, the Philippines, there is still a lot of actions to be taken to really educate girls and to really make education accessible for both genders. Thank you so much for highlighting that. Any more questions? Yes.
Yeah, we have a few more questions online. We've got a question here from France, which says, what learnings can we take from the space race that can be applied to climate change?
That's a good question. So here's the lesson I would take out of the space race, is the space race was a competition. It was a heated competition. It was an existential competition. It was two ideologies trying to prove that each was better than the other one, right? And lives were at stake. This was a big deal back then. But at the height of the Cold War, somehow the United States and the Soviet Union decided to fly a mission together, the Apollo-Soyuz or Soyuz-Apollo, depending on which country you're in. And so from that seed of goodwill, from that seed of cooperation, the International Space Station was born out of. I would argue that the end of the Cold War came from that. Didn't come from that directly, but that helped accelerate the end of the Cold War. And I think what the lesson learned is that even at the height of fear, because the space race was a fear-based competition, right? And even at the height of that fear-based competition, humanity somehow had a kernel of awe and wonder and said, you know what? You guys think it's really cool to fly in space. We think it's really cool to fly in space. Wouldn't it be cool to do it together, even if it's just an act of friendship just for this one time? And I think that's the example I would use from the space race is the willingness to at times set aside our differences and work together and do something fun, just to prove that we can do it. Say, humanity, we're not that bad. I mean, we do a lot of bad things, but every once in a while we could do something really cool and really good. So.
Amazing. Okay, sir.
Hi, Ron. Just a bit of a lead on from that last question, actually. If you could give a nudge to Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos about their aspirations for space and do something more productive, perhaps, with what they're trying to achieve, what would you give them your tips about where they should be focusing their attentions on?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't put Blue Origin, which is Jeff Bezos' company, and SpaceX, which is Elon Musk's company, in the same boat. One is doing suborbital space tourism, and the other one is trying to populate the solar system. So suborbital versus orbital is a big difference. But although I do know that Jeff Bezos and Blue Origin have their sights set on eventually doing that. I applaud what they're all doing, including Richard Branson and Virgin Galactic, because I think the more people that see the planet from that vantage point, the better off we're all going to be. I also think that we're on the verge of the dawn of a new era of space travel, where hopefully space travel becomes as commonplace as air travel, and it's kind of reminiscent of the early days of aviation. You know, back in the beginning, it was a very rare occurrence that somebody flew in an airplane. It was a spectacle, and you know, a lot of times it was people that had the money to pay, you know, to pay, and so. But that was the catalyst for something greater. For now, we don't think twice about flying anywhere in the world, right? I woke up a day and a half ago in Denver, Colorado, and here I am, you know, in Scotland, and so. I applaud what they're doing from that point of view, but we need to do it correctly. We need to make sure that we're doing it as environmentally sound as we can, that we make the least amount of impact that we can, and that, you know, a lot of the advice I would give is on how, especially in the case of space tourism, like Richard Branson and Jeff Bezos, where people are paying a great deal of money to get 5 minutes, you know, and to get a view of the planet and do a little bit of floating. I would spend a lot of time preparing for the experience, preparing for the transformation that can occur from that experience. So it's not just a joyride. It becomes a really meaningful transformation into being able to see the bigger picture, to be able to have deeper levels of compassion, deeper levels of empathy, deeper levels of understanding for the trials and tribulations that people down there on the surface face. And I think there's a way to prepare for that emotional, spiritual aspect of those journeys. And I don't know of any efforts that are going into trying to do that. And so that would be one piece of advice I would give is if you really want to make a difference, if you really believe that you're doing this so that you transform people's view of the planet, then help them prepare for it in a way that's going to be effective.
Okay, amazing. Is there more question?
Yeah, we could probably do one last question from the audience online. And I'm going to take one that's directed to you, Marinelle.
Okay.
Which says, Marinelle, I would love to hear more about how you started your climate journey and the struggles that you faced in the Philippines.
Oh, I am a climate justice advocate. I have survived the Super Typhoon Haiyan, which is the strongest typhoon ever recorded in human history last 2013. And actually, this November 8 will be commemorating its 8th year anniversary. And it's so sad that up until now, we have still 1,000 of people who are still missing. Up until today, I still have a lot of friends who are still missing. And I know they're dead because it's been eight years, but we didn't find their body yet. My family has been very devastated. I have seen death in my own eyes. Our family, our community was so devastated. Our relatives was already praying for us because they thought we were all dead. We are located in a peninsula facing the Pacific Ocean, so we are always on the front line of every other disaster. In the Philippines, we experience an average of 20 typhoons per year. Imagine living in a coast that is being always threatened by so many disasters, and you are experiencing 20 disasters per year. We have been trying to rebuild and rebuild again, but then we couldn't because there will be another disaster that would wash away everything that we have rebuilt. It is a it is a struggle for us to survive. And up until this moment, we are leaving the brunt of climate disaster every day of our lives. And lucky for those people who says that climate change will happen in the near future, because it is now happening to us. It has killed a lot of lives already, and I am here raising my voice, sharing my story in behalf of those people who have perished because they cannot tell their stories anymore. I am here to tell my community and my story, to put a human face to the climate crisis, because people has to understand that we cannot lose lives anymore. We cannot afford to lose lives anymore. And that is why I'm really looking forward to talking with Ron today, because there is like a great connection. A lot of people are saying, if we can't address the climate crisis today, we should have go to Mars. But that is not even a solution. it means, and even I was in a taxi going to COP the other day, the driver was saying, we really love to have like a warmer or the 30 degrees here in Scotland. And I said, if you have that kind of temperature in Scotland, the other side of the world is already dead by that point. And and every day we are facing that kind of threat that and the other disaster we will be dead. So that is why we really have to act now and to put justice to those who have perished because of climatic disasters. And I think we don't have any more questions for Ron. Thank you so much, Ron, for being here, and thank you for presenting that. I have learned so much, and I really hope that we will have this kind of conversation again. This is really humbling for me as a climate activist. I think I'm nobody compared to you, but I had this kind of opportunity to be able to have this conversation with you. Thank you so much to One Young World and Extreme International for putting this event together and for just having this kind of platform to have like climate activist and an experter talking with each other and have this kind of conversation. Thank you and have a great day.